Hi biology students, welcome to yet another great week of our distance learning. This week we're going to be getting into some new things and kind of shifting gears a little bit, so hoping that you'll watch at least the first part of this video so you can get some of that info. Also, just a reminder that if you have any questions, you're unsure about anything, please shoot me an email and I'll try to work that out with you. In order though to get help through email, you have to also check your email when I reply. I usually do it pretty quickly, so we can have that conversation. Also, recommend you join our class meetings. Had a nice time with specifically period 6-7, thanks to everyone who keeps coming to that class's meetings, but I'd love to see a better turnout from some of the other classes. But I always enjoy seeing everyone on those, so I encourage you to keep coming, even if it's just to talk about what's going on, talk about Harry Potter. It's what I've been doing on a lot of mine for a few minutes. All right. We're going to get into some announcements, so I'm going to move my little bubble and get into some things to remind you before we get into the content, because there's a lot that's changing with how I'm teaching. So first, just to remind you that you should be finishing the tasks from your focus species. So that was the assignment last week. And instead of doing a quiz or turning in the packet, last week I asked you to turn in your research tracker. Now, if you've done all of those things, you should be able to share that with me, and I'll go through and quickly just give you a grade if you did it or not and send it back to you. But if you have not gotten it graded yet, which most of you haven't, make sure you submit that so I can give you some credit. And then also I posted a assignment on Classroom last week that gives you some guidelines on what you're supposed to be doing for your species research project. That's going to be kind of a work in progress each week as we get towards the end of the school year. But I have added a document that has your guidelines on there, and if you want to, you can get a slideshow started and added into the assignment. Now, that actual final slideshow won't be due until the end of the school year, the last week of school, mid-June. But if you want to just make a slideshow to have it there, you can always add that in too. And then a big reminder that we've kind of finished up with Unit 5, our Diversity of Life Evolution unit. And so a lot of you have already done this, but if you haven't yet, make sure that you have finished or done some sort of work on each week of your packet and turn that in. Everyone who turned that in for the first 4 weeks, a couple weeks ago, I've graded that as of Friday. So if you've turned it in since then, it might not be graded yet. And everyone did a really great job. I had such a fun time reading those. So keep up the good work. And even if you're behind, it's still useful to go through and do some of that work. And then of course, if you've not finished all your quizzes, go and do that. I think most of them are still set to retake mode. So if you want to retake it, do that, but make sure you are ready to retake and make sure that your original score is retakeable. Like some of you got a 5 and then you retook it and got another 5. So, I mean, awesome, but doesn't really mean not much in the grade book. Okay, so here's the big announcements. So we're shifting how we're going to be doing things for the next 2 weeks, and then also the last 2 weeks of school after that. So if you haven't looked at a calendar in a while, we're in mid-May right now. We have 2 more weeks. And by the way, Monday next week is Memorial Day, so we're not going to be posting anything that day. And then you'll have 2 weeks after that that are in June that are for finishing up your research project, and then it'll be the end of the school year. So this project is basically your final, and we'll keep working towards that until the end of the year. So now that we've finished up Unit 5 and we've finished the research for Unit 5, you will have a new research tracker. So I'm going to pull that up to show you. Each of you will have your own copy, and instead of making one big research tracker, because we're putting a little bit more in these, I'm just going to be making a separate document for this week, week 6, and for next week, week 7. And you'll turn these in separately and get credit separately. So, for example, this is the one for this week, and for this week, you're going to have 3 tasks, or you're going to have, 3 parts of task 6. So I'm just numbering them based on the week. Week 5 kind of had a task as well, so we're kind of skipping task 5. And so your assignments this week, rather than doing separate assignments in a packet like we did last unit, will be doing these research tasks. So once you finish the notes and you're ready, like on Tuesday or Wednesday, to get started with that assignment, you're going to go and see what's part A. This will also be on your slides, and you're going to be putting in your notes and responses in here, just like you did last unit. So that's going to take the place of your packet. So there's no more packet with initial ideas, refine, revise. I'm still going to give you your EQs of the week, but you're not going to have as much to do on the packet. So hopefully that'll make it more straightforward and maybe simpler so we can really focus in on just researching your species. And then when you finish with that at the end of the week, you're going to turn that in on Classroom, just like you usually do. So no more packet. You will still though have a weekly EQ just so we can continue that practice of framing our learning with that central idea. You'll have notes. There's definitely still going to be a lot of vocab in this unit, but a lot of it's vocab that you've probably learned in previous years. It's pretty intuitive. It's just like nature and ecosystems. And then you're going to also have a quiz to help review and see how well you've learned the vocab for that week. And then your revise will also be on your weekly quiz. So it'll be kind of just a short free response question at the end of your quiz. And I'll just go through and grade those manually to see how you did. Because I really love reading your work because you guys really have learned a lot even though we're doing this at a distance. So it's kind of fun for me to go through and see how much you've learned and how much you can express in words. Okay, here's your little schedule. So I recommend if you're starting on Monday, just going through your notes, watching this video, whatnot, and then spreading out the research amongst the 3 days. Each of those shouldn't take too long, and it'll hopefully help you understand the different concepts for each part. So got a couple of the same slides as always. I added a link in here for the Zoom meetings if you've been having a hard time finding that. Your wellness tip of the week is to have some fun and laugh a little. That's always a nice way to relieve some stress, so you'll see a question about that. Okay, getting into this unit, I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly, and then I'll let you guys watch other videos and use your Quizlet to go over some of this vocab. So this unit, and it's going to be a short one, obviously, because we're running into the end of the year, is all about how things in an ecosystem interact. And the big picture at the end of this unit is looking at how if one species were to be removed from an ecosystem, how would that impact everyone else? So it's kind of looking at how everything's connected, how things can, the outcomes can affect of one thing can affect the outcomes of another, and just seeing how all of life connects in that big old ecosystem and web of life. So you have the next 3 weeks to kind of focus on, and this week we're going to be focusing on the role and the interactions, behaviors of a species, and more specifically, you'll be looking at your species. So this is just a reminder. I put this slide in here twice. So this is from the very beginning of the year. Those of you who've been with me since September might remember this. This was in the beginning of Unit 2 of the organization levels of life. So this is the really small stuff, atom to molecule to organelle into a cell. Cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems, all the way to an organism. Yippee, how fun. However, we're done with that. So we're gonna go from organism and build up to an even bigger level of organization until we get to the entire planet, the biosphere. So we left off at organism. That's one single living thing, an individual, we also call it sometimes. When you have a bunch of organisms that all are the same species living in a same area, that is what we call a population. Now we've used that word a few times, so I think that one will be easy to remember. But the most important thing when you're thinking about populations is that a population is only one species. Community is when you get all of the living things, all of the populations in an area living together. So sometimes we mix up community with ecosystem because we think of an ecosystem with this definition, but the difference between a community and an ecosystem is we add in the non-living things to the ecosystem. Because obviously the living things are very important. All the animals, big, small, predators, herbivores, plants, fungi, bacteria, all those things are important. But without their non-living environment, water, sunlight, the earth, geology, things like that, you wouldn't have a space or all the resources you need for that community. So that's why the ecosystem is the top level that really encompasses everything that is needed for living things to survive. Finally, when you add all of the different ecosystems that are similar, we call that a biome. So there's like 7, it's kind of debated, but there's 7 to 9 different biomes across the earth. So you can think of a woodland forest, or a forest like we have here in Oregon, all those forests, that would be a biome. There's a lot of ecosystems that overlap within that biome, but the big forest that covers all the way from Canada into the mountains of the Rocky Mountains and stuff are all a part of that big biome. So kind of leveling up to the big thing, and then we have everything together is what we call a biosphere. That's our Earth. So this video here is pretty short. It's about 2 minutes long, and if you would like to review some of those terms and kind of get the difference between what's an ecosystem versus a habitat versus one of the most important words that I've mentioned before, but we're going to really look at this week, is called a niche. Sometimes people call it a niche. This is one of the most hotly debated topics amongst biologists. Is it a niche or a niche? And I'll call it a niche. So maybe that means that you'll call it a niche. So just to go over what that is before we move forward, we're looking at what makes a species unique, right? So we've kind of learned about how each species has unique adaptations that help it to survive. And this includes both traits and behaviors. So we have what they do, their behaviors, what they eat, where they live, and other interactions. So who are they relying on, maybe within their population, or maybe things that are other species. And those all make up their niche. So this is a big word, especially in ecological biology. And the biggest thing is that we don't want to get this word mixed up with what a habitat is. So we're going to focus on a niche for task A, or part A of your task 6. So a niche is not the same as a habitat, because a habitat, as most of you know, is where an organism lives. However, a niche includes the habitat, but also everything else that an organism does to survive in their environment. So we call it like they're filling a role or filling a space in their environment. And it's not just the physical space, it's also what they eat, their food source. So how are they getting that? How are they competing for that food source? Reproduction, other interactions, and things like that. So you can see, like in this one tree, this is kind of one habitat, this spruce tree has multiple different birds that each fill in a different niche. So some might live in one space and eat one type of food and compete for this type of resource, whereas the others fill in a different one. And for the most part, because each one is adapted to their different unique niche, they're not going to be competing with each other too much. And this is going to help them to survive. If, however, they were to overlap, that would get to the point where they'd be competing and there'd be a little bit less availability of resources and maybe less survival. So just like I said, each species has adapted to have their unique niche. So it's unique to every different species, helping them to survive. When that is shared or overlapped, that's when competition occurs. And we're going to have another big word for 2 types of competition, this unit, 2 different words. So competition is fighting for a resource, a limited resource. There's all sorts of things you can compete for. Food is a common one. Water and sunlight, especially for plants. Space and territory, this is huge. Territory is mostly tied to this last one, mates. So within a species, you're going to have a lot of fighting for mates because there's a limited resource of other things, other females usually, to mate with. So 2 types of competition. When we're looking within one population, like I was mentioning here with competing for mates, this is going to be called intra-specific. If you remember intra, I don't know if we've learned this one yet, means within. That's a root word. And so within a population, only one species competing against itself for resources. And this is pretty common, right? So both for mates and for things like food, if they're not a cooperative species. Or interspecific competition, this is between 2 or more of different species, so 2 or more populations. So this is very common as well, especially for plants, thinking of fighting for sunlight, water. A lot of things share food sources, and then also